Hello everybody. Today we're going to talk about taking your pedal board and running your effects pedals through a pedal loop switcher, and then running those effects both before in the front of your amp and in the back in the effects loop. Because there's things like distortion and phaser, in my case, that you want to have out in front of your amp input, and other things like reverb and delay and modulation effects that you would want to have in your effects loop if your amp has an effects loop. So if you don't have an effects loop, take off. This video ain't for you at all. But if you do, stick around. And if you, even more so, if you'd like to see how you set up a stereo rig, because what we have today is we've got this Bogner. Sorry for the stand in the way. The Bogner is one side of things. This is all in stereo. The Marshall is the other side of things. This is a Bogner DeWinde head, a 15-watt head. This is a Marshall DSL 40, and it's running the low power, so it's 20 watts right now. The both of them, the signal comes from a guitar like this Strat and goes into, well, the tuner pedal, the Polytune, and then into the small stone, and out of there it goes into this Rockman stereo chorus. This is old school analog chorus. It splits the signal there. It sends one side of it out directly to this Marshall, and the other side of it goes out and into the pedal board. And so that comes into the pedal board right here in our input. And then we have our tuner input, which is unused right now. I'll explain why later. And then all of our loop pedals that are in the loop sections, and I'll talk about that in more detail in a second too. And then out, and then a MIDI. But that's the basic setup of things. And so where it gets complicated, let's talk about that. So still, while we're doing connections, let's keep going. So like I said, the input, here's your input. Right here. And so in my case, like I said, I split my signal. Half of it goes straight to the Marshall and half of it comes to this pedal board. And so this, and there's the reason that I do that is because this custom badass serves as overdrive for the Bogner amp on a mid-gain setting, whereas the Marshall does it all itself. I got 4 channels riding up in there. Yeah. And so your input comes here, and then the next slot is a tuner. I don't use the tuner because I have my switcher set up custom, and the switch that does tuner by default, I have it being used to do a bank change or something like that. I don't remember. But so we got input, we got tuner, and then we got our first loop. And so this loop is actually not going to pedal. That pedal's been pulled out for whatever reason. But you have a loop, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 loops. And so here's where it gets tricky. What you're going to do, tricky to have effects both on the front and the back. And so what you're going to do is, like in my case, I use 1 and 2 are before the amp. Loop 3 is my loop, so loop 3 needs to always be on in all of your patches. If you turn it off, nothing works. None of this stuff works, that is. And then this is my reverb, this is my delay in 5, 4 and 5. So 3, your signal path, what happens now is we're going through into our input and through the loops. And they'll go in order if they're turned on, as long as you leave everything defaulted. And so when it gets to 3, what happens is we've got a send and a return. So our send from this, we are going directly out and into the Bogner input. And so there starts one portion of that loop. And so at that point, back to the looper pedal board, at that point, we then kind of move on this return right here, which you're going to want to know about that. We have the effects going through the Marshall, okay? And so this right here, this return, if we go up to the Marshall back here, that return is connected, I was going to say, I would assume, to the send, yes, of the effects loop. So this guy your send of, this is your kind of transport loop, you could call it. You got your send going to an input of the front of the amp, and then you got your return coming from the effects loop send. Then we move on with our effects, and we get to the end, the output. So that's got to complete the whole loop, so that goes back to the effects loop, and that goes into the return. So to recap, you're going input. These are my front of the amp effects, and then we start our loop utility, as it were. And in that section there, we take our send, run it to the amp's input. Our return, we connect that to the amp's effects loop sends to returns, ends to outs always. Then we move on. We add our back of the amp, the effect loop effects in these loops. And then on the output of the switcher, that completes our loop. Remember, we've got one open still. It's in the effects loop. And since this is an output, that's going to be an input, which is the return. So that goes to the return, and off we go. This is for channel switching on the Bogner, and this is channel switching on the Marshall. And so basically, in a nutshell, that's how it works. And so the only other thing that's kind of crazy that I have going on right now, not crazy really, but say you've got, your two amps, the whole point is to have things in stereo, right? And so as you can see, we've got a TC Electronic Hall of Fame reverb pedal, which is a stereo effects unit here. And so that is stereo. That did Giga Delay from Boss, that's also stereo. And so these two don't play well together, as in I can't link the inputs and the outputs of the two together and have it come out stereo on the other end. I don't know why. Pedals are weird that way. I've had a TC Electronic, one of the delay pedals, and it did play well. You could do that with stuff, but I don't have that around right now. And anyways, when you do that, I then end up kind of hijacking this loop over here, because already by default, remember the way we have this set up, the Marshall is the effects loop that's the Pedalboard is utilizing. Though the front of the amp, and that's what's cool about using this method, the front of the amp stuff is going over to the Bogner, while the back of the amp stuff is going to the Marshall. But then we're like, well, we want that reverb to be like nice in stereo, or the delay, but in this case, the reverb. We want that to be nice and in stereo, and so we've got to hijack that effects loop. And how are we going to do that? No problem, right? What we're going to do is that's got to send in a return. And so we've already got signal. What you got to do, you got to have signal coming into your pedal. And then it's got to get to the return on that effects loop. So I think it's possible, and I might be wrong. Tear me up in comments if you like. I'd love to know, really. And we'll probably look it up, but I don't know. So right now at this moment, I don't know. The some amps probably, I think you can use just the return and send something into it. This Bogner Duende head seems to only work if both jacks are being utilized, the return and the send. So no problem. What we had going on here, if we're just going from the pedal board, this stuff, this guy hitting this amp, this is a mono effects loop. So we're only using one of the inputs and outputs here. So one of these outputs goes, and it's the yellow one actually, it goes back into the loop, into the pedal switcher here. And so it's going to go out, and make it to that effects loop. It's going to come out this guy to the effects return. The other output, this thing, is routed over to the Bogner's effect return. And so that naturally needs its loop. Like I said, this amp head wants to have that loop complete, so the send is just going to the other input on this Hall of Fame. And so I'll turn the volume knobby up over here and turn the tuner off, and we'll hear a little bit of reverb. So Bogner amp is off. You can hear that's just the Marshall. If I turn that off, obviously there's no reverb. Got it turned up pretty loud so we can hear the difference. Now we'll turn on that Bogner as well. And you can hear we've got nice stereo reverb through both amps. So that is a very quick look without thinking too hard about the craziness of how this loop thing works. If you think about it too hard, your brain might hurt a little. I know mine has at times, but once you get it into it and start messing with it, it's really not that big of a deal. You'll find it's fun to mess with this guitar madness. So if you have any questions or comments, let me know. Hit the subscribe thing. We'll do some more, lots more chatter on all this guitar stuff. Of course, you gotta do it, man. It's super fun and awesome. So have a great day. I'm Andy. Later.